There are a lot of skin color variations when we're talking about humans. And the different color variations that you see are primarily due to the presence of 3 pigments. The first one, melanin, is produced by the melanocytes in the epidermis, and that pigment is a yellow, reddish brown to black color. That pigment is produced in high quantities when we're talking about people that have darker skin color. So if we're talking about a very dark brown color, that would be individuals that have a high production of melanin. Melanin is really important for protecting against UV light. Carotene is a pigment that is yellow or orange in color. It's actually one that we have a lot of when we're talking about carrots and really brightly colored fruits and vegetables that are reds, yellows, and oranges. And then the last one, hemoglobin, is red, and this is from its presence in our blood. When we're talking about lighter skinned individuals, individuals that don't have as much melanin being produced, then we're going to see a little bit more of the pinkish color, which is really the hemoglobin that we tend to be seeing through all of that. So our skin color, it is primarily determined by pigments, but it can be affected by the amount of oxygenation in our blood. It can be influenced by our mood, by our emotions. It can also be influenced by certain disease states. So if we just talk about the oxygenation, if we have poor oxygenation in our blood, we call that condition cyanosis, and that results in a blue coloration. We can see that blue coloration a lot more clearly if you do have individuals that have a lighter colored skin, but it is present when we're talking about darker skinned individuals as well. So in a darker skinned individual, it's difficult to see it just in the skin because there's so much melanin being produced there that it's kind of masking that bluish appearance. But if you do look closely at certain places like the nail beds, you can still see the blue coloration present there if there is a condition of low oxygenation. Emotions certainly influence what we look like as far as coloring. We can have a red coloration due to emotions such as anger. We can have a very pale coloration due to fear. We can have certain disease states that affect it. We can have something like a fever that causes us to have a red coloration because we are overheated. And then there are conditions like low blood pressure that might cause someone to look more pale. Jaundice is yet another example. With jaundice, it causes a yellow coloration, and that's going to be to the accumulation of bile because the liver is not functioning properly. Another part of our integumentary system, besides just looking at the cells of the dermis and the cells of the epidermis, is that we do have a lot of skin appendages. These skin appendages fall into a few different groups. We have cutaneous glands, we have hair follicles, and then also the nails. So let's talk a little bit about these skin appendages. Okay, so the first ones, the cutaneous glands, these are all what we call exocrine glands. Exo means exit, so what that means is that these are going to release their secretions to the skin surface, and the way that they're going to do that is through the use of ducts. These include sebaceous glands, which would be producing sebum, and then we also have sweat glands, which produce sweat. These are mostly going to be glands that are found in the dermis, but again, they're exocrine glands. So although they're in the dermis, which is the lower layer of the skin, they are going to end up with their secretions exiting the body, so exiting the surface of the skin. So if we look at some of the cutaneous glands, the first one up is the sebaceous glands, and these are oil glands. These are found pretty much all over the skin, with the exception of the palms of the hand and the soles of the feet. The reason for that is that these are ducts that are typically associated with hair follicles. So these are going to produce sebum, which is oil, and they will deposit that in the hair follicle, so they need to be present in places where we have hair. So if you think about the palms of your hand and you think about the soles of your feet, we don't have hair in those particular locations. So maybe that will help you to remember where we do have the presence of our sebaceous glands. Their job is to produce this sebum. The sebum is going to lubricate the skin. It prevents our hair from becoming brittle, and it's also going to contain some chemicals that do help to kill off bacteria. So not just protect against bacteria, but actually help to fight them off. So it is really important that we do get that oil produced, which is the sebum, on the surface of our skin or on the surface of our scalp. We can have different appearances or conditions when those ducts get clogged up. If it is just a clogged duct, that is what we call a whitehead. If it's a clogged duct where the sebum has basically oxidized, then that is black, and then we see it as a blackhead. Sometimes we get an actual infection there, and that's when we see the presence of acne. Now, as adolescents, we tend to have more active sebaceous glands, so more oil is produced, and because of that, we tend to be more oily during those adolescent years, and that can also give rise to more clogged ducts that might get infected. So we can get more acne when we're talking about the adolescent years. Another case of kind of overproductive sebaceous glands is the condition that you see here with the baby, which we call cradle cap. In this case, you have a lot of sebum that accumulates and it clogs up, and then you start to get some flaking off of the scalp. So we have some white flakes that flake off, and we call that cradle cap. It just kind of brushes off and usually kind of outgrow that. If we look at a second type of cutaneous gland, this is the sweat glands. The sweat glands do come in two types. We have what are called eccrine glands, and then we have apocrine glands. The eccrine glands are the most abundant. These produce the sweat, and that sweat is primarily water and then also some salt. These ducts usually open externally, so we have pores on the surface of our skin that help that sweat to get out, and these are going to play a major role in heat regulation. So when we get overheated, sweat is produced, and then the evaporation of that sweat from the surface of our skin helps to cool our bodies. The second type, the apocrine glands, these are found in specific locations. These are found in the armpits, which are the axillary regions, and then we also have them in the genital regions. These are going to be ducts that empty into hair follicles, and the secretion that they are emptying is really similar to sweat. So it's water and a lot of salts, but in addition to that, there's also going to be a lot of fatty acids and then also proteins. These particular glands are activated during pain, stress, and sexual foreplay, and at that point they would be emptying their secretions into the hair follicles. Now, exactly what those secretions do, there's a lot of unknown there. In this image, we're getting a closer look at the glands that are associated with the skin. The sebaceous glands produce sebum, and that gets secreted into the hair follicles, so that secretion would make its way to the outside of our bodies, so to the skin surface, and that gives our oily appearance to the surface of our skin. Another thing, the eccrine glands, so those are sweat glands. So notice that these basically exit to a pore, so directly to the surface. So both the sebaceous glands and the eccrine glands, these are both exocrine glands. Exocrine glands because what they are secreting is exiting or going to the outside. Hairs are another skin appendage that I think we're a lot more familiar with. These are flexible epithelial structures that are produced by a hair follicle. The shaft is the part of the hair that's actually exiting the skin, and most of the hair shaft is going to be material that's composed of protein, and it's also going to be dead cells that we're seeing there. If we look closer at the hair texture, whether we have a very wavy hair, whether it's more of a curly, kinky type hair, whether it's really coarse in texture, that really has to do with the overall shape of the hair shaft. Whether it's an oval shape, whether it's a flattened shape, or whether it is perfectly round. So if we have perfectly round hair shafts, we end up with really coarse hair. If we have a more flattened shape to the hair shaft, then that's going to be more curly, more kinky in appearance. And then if it's an oval shape, that will be a very fine, smooth hair texture. If we look at the hair follicle in closer detail, the hair follicle has basically two portions to it. It has an inner sheath of epithelium tissue, and that is going to ultimately form the hair. And then we have an outer fibrous sheath, which is made up of dermal connective tissue. So if we just look here, you can see the portions of the hair follicle. It's all of this right here. And the epithelial sheath, that inner layer, that is what's going to ultimately form the hair that will then be pushed up and will eventually exit the skin as the hair shaft. Also associated with the hair follicle is this structure called the erector pili. This is going to help to raise the hairs up when we get goosebumps. So the point of this is that this is going to help to hold some heat into the body, insulate the body a little bit, and then they can also allow the hair to lay flat again. So those structures that you see right there, they're very important for raising the hairs and then letting them rest back down flat. If we talk a little bit about the nails, nails are considered skin appendages. These are scale-like modifications of the epidermis, and with these there is what we call a free edge, and that's the part that you trim regularly, and then we have the root, which is further back on the finger. So if you look here, you can see a little bit about how this is structured. These are going to provide some protection to the tip of the finger. Okay, so we can see down here towards the bed, we are going to have the nail matrix. That is responsible for producing new nail growth. And then as the nail is produced and it kind of grows outward, we have the cells becoming more and more keratinized. So they will have more and more keratin in them, and they will also begin to die. So that when we're looking at the nails, most of the cells that are there are going to be dead cells.